Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Canadian Avalanche Association's 2020 Case Studies and Research Presentations online. This is a part of our virtual spring conference. Many of you will have heard this introduction yesterday, but we have many new guests today, so I'm doing it again. Like everything else that changed this spring, our spring conference in person was not possible. And if there's anything the CAA and our peer groups and international friends do well, it's coming together. We know that these are uncertain times and many of you are hurting and struggling, but at the CAA, we thought the least we could do was help bring us together in this way and on this virtual platform. If you're on the call, it's because you've committed to excellence in advancing your Avalanche practice or your business, and that commitment shows by you being here. Our spring conference is an opportunity for you to build on your success in that world and to do so while we face the challenges related to social distancing and other effects of the pandemic. As practitioners, you learn from one another, and the conference format that's possible because exceptional individuals come forward to share their presentations. We put out the call for those presentations and we're blown away by the great presentations we received. We certainly enjoyed a fabulous set of presentations yesterday, and we look forward to more today and tomorrow. Like many of you, I can't wait to see them. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the partners that help make these events possible for the CAA. We can't do these things without the support of many folks, including our partners, and so we'd like to recognize them here. Our year-round partners include our principal partner, Mammut, our premier partner, CIL Explosives, our select partner, Arc'teryx, and our foundation partners, BCA, Reco, the North Face, and Patagonia. Our industry training program is also supported by a wide range of partners and collaborators. These organizations contribute financial support, avalanche safety equipment, venues, expertise, and more. Their logos are presented on the screen before you now. Their generous support is vital to maintaining our high standards, industry relevance, up-to-date information, and best practices, all the things that the CAA courses are known for. So thank you very much to all of our partners and collaborators. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Pascal Haegli is no stranger to most of you. He holds the NSERC chair in the Industrial Research Chair in Avalanche Risk Management at Simon Fraser University. He's presented widely in international forums and many times at the CAA. He's a great colleague and great friend to our community. And Pascal is going to join us and speak about do recreationalists have the skill they need to use the Avalanche Bulletin effectively? Pascal, over to you.
Thank you, Joe, for the nice introduction.
Great, we see you, and your presentation is just waiting for you to go into presentation mode.
Okay, so it's actually in presentation mode on here. So
you're good to go, Pascal.
Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here and to get the chance to talk to you from my home here about the research that I and my research group have been doing over the last year. Before I launch into my own presentation, I want to give you a quick overview of the SARP presentation that you will be hearing this morning. If you looked at the schedule, there's a bit of an onslaught of SARP presentation coming at you this morning. There's 4 in a row. The first 2, mine and Katie's, will be about our research on the topic of risk communication, primarily targeted at recreational public. Then Florian is going to give a presentation of our research on how we can increase the utility of snowpack modeling for the community. And then John Sykes is going to finish it up with a presentation about his upcoming research on terrain and decision-making in avalanche terrain. So that's going to be the program for the next 4 presentations. Over the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to spend some time to try to shed some light on this question. Do recreationalists have the skills they need to use the bulletin effectively? And this is primarily the work of Henry Finn, one of my recent graduate students who just graduated a couple of weeks ago and is now actually enjoying some well-deserved time off. So I'm really presenting on his behalf here. There were also a number of people who contributed significantly to this research. Anne Sinclair, a former student of mine and now Avalanche Canada forecaster. Robin Gregory, a well-known expert in structured decision-making and risk communication, as well as Carl Klassen, the manager of the Avalanche Warning Service at Avalanche Canada. Let me start my presentation with briefly talking about the objective of the bulletin. The bulletin really aims to provide the public with up-to-date information about the current avalanche conditions to help them make informed choices about when and where to recreate in the backcountry. This is a fairly challenging task for multiple reasons. First, the phenomenon is fairly complex. The data we have has lots of uncertainty. And then also the audience is highly diverse. We have a wide range of different types of activities that people pursue in the backcountry, and there's a wide range of training levels and backgrounds. Last year, Anne Sinclair presented a Avalanche Bulletin user typology. This was based on 48 qualitative interviews with a variety of backcountry users, where we tried to identify how do people typically use the bulletin. And she came up with this hierarchy of distinct patterns, and she identified 5 patterns. There's the type A's, who typically don't use the bulletin at all. There's the type B's, who primarily rely on the danger rating to decide whether to go out at all or not. Type C's combine the danger rating with their knowledge of terrain to make choices about when and where to go. And then type D use the avalanche problem information to decide where to recreate. And type E's use the bulletin as a starting point and then complement it with their own observations in the field to make informed choices. That's the hierarchy that Anne came up with. If you want to learn more about this hierarchy, you can read up on it in the articles that she just published in the journal and the Avalanche Review as well. And if you want to read the whole details of it, you can download Anne's full thesis at our website at the URL shown on the screen. Now, after sort of identifying these user types, the obvious next question is, do users' knowledge, understanding, and application of the bulletin bulletin components match with their self-identified use routine? So basically, do they have what it takes to use the bulletin at the level they say they do? Now, to answer this question in a meaningful way, it's important to realize that there is a variety of legitimate ways that bulletin can be used. So for example, for a B user who just decides whether to go into the backcountry or not, a fairly superficial understanding of the danger rating is probably sufficient. On the other side, a D user who aims to make nuanced decisions about what slopes to ski and which ones to avoid needs a much deeper understanding of the information that's provided in the bulletin. And so if we want to assess bulletin literacy with respect to these user types, we need to keep these differences in mind. Now, to assess bulletin literacy, we conducted an extensive survey in the spring of 2019, and Henry already presented a little bit about this survey last spring. At this point, I want to thank Avalanche Canada, Parks Canada, and also many US avalanche centers for promoting this survey. In the end, we had almost 3,200 participants, which is an amazing sample. It was about half Canadian and American. And while the vast majority of participants were backcountry skiers, which is much easier for us to recruit, we had more than 200 snowshoers and about the same number of ice climbers in our sample. So those are substantial samples by themselves. Now, we also had a fairly good sample across those different Avalanche Bulletin user types. As you can see, the vast majority, or just under 50%, were E's. It's much easier for us to sort of get high-end users to participate in these types of surveys. But we also had almost 200 B's, almost 50 A's, and we also had about 70 professional users who don't use the bulletin because they have access to other types of information like the InfoX, for example. So we were fairly proud of our broad sample. Now, the bulk of the survey was detailed questions about the danger rating, avalanche problems, and then we also included a slope choice exercise where people had to put the information together and make an actual choice in a hypothetical but realistic decision scenario. Now, the questions were organized according to a hierarchy of learning objectives. We sort of based our structure there on Bloom's taxonomy of learning objectives. And that's how I colored the questions here on the slide. So there were sort of the most simple questions were simply knowledge recall. Then we had at a higher level questions about whether people understood the icons that were used to communicate this information. Then we had some deeper knowledge questions to see whether people understand what those concepts actually mean, like what is a meaningful mitigation method for wind slaps, for example. And then, as I mentioned, we had the slope choice exercise, which tried to test people's ability to apply the information in a meaningful way. So this hierarchy, we use this hierarchy to try to better understand at what level people's abilities break down potentially. So let's have a look at some of these questions in more detail. And I want to use here the avalanche danger rating recall question to illustrate how we graded people on these questions. So the question for the danger rating recall was simply to list out or write out the 5 levels in the right order from the least severe to the most severe. Fairly straightforward question for answering, at least for the people on the call here, but actually fairly challenging to grade. And our grading scale here for the Bs, which are the people who just use the danger scale to decide whether to go out or not, we decided on these levels. People who recalled the scale 4 or 5 levels of the scale in the correct order, we considered that to be an excellent performance. Recalling 2 or 3 levels in the right order, we still considered that to be sufficient. Anything less, we considered insufficient, also if they didn't understand the question. For C's, we had slightly more stringent grading criteria. So for people who say they combine the danger rating with terrain information, we thought they needed a higher level of understanding to properly do that. So in this case, only the 5 levels in the right order were considered excellent. 4 levels were considered sufficient. 3 levels in the correct in the correct order were considered insufficient, and then anything less than that, or any levels in the wrong order, were considered to be problematic. So you can see here how we use different grading levels or criteria for different user levels. Now, in our samples of B's and C's, this is the actual grade distribution that we had. So we had about 81% of the B's were sufficient or excellent, and about 76% of the C's were sufficient or excellent. It is really sort of the main distinction here is that level or that border between insufficient and sufficient that's most important. Now, we developed similar grading schemes for all of the different questions, and we won't have time to get into all of those in this presentation. I want to spend a little bit more time on the slope choice exercise. So here we basically gave people an avalanche bulletin, which you see on the right, which had danger ratings for all the 3 elevation bands and the information about the existing avalanche problems. And people actually had to click on a button to get to the avalanche problem information, similar to how it's designed on the Avalanche Canada website. We also gave them a hypothetical mountainscape with a few highlighted slopes, and their task was to tell us which of these slopes were most appropriate for travel under the given conditions. And we expected a few responses. For example, for people who would have just looked at the danger scale information, we would have expected that they would choose the below tree line slopes because the danger rating is moderate at that level. For people that actually looked at the avalanche problem information, we would have expected them to choose the southwesterly slope in the Alpine because there's actually no problem on that particular aspect. Now, there's many other reasonable choices that you can make, and to get insight on those, we actually had a follow-up question which allowed people to basically justify their choices. And so we were really after seeing whether people are able to have a decision rule and apply it consistently for those 4 different slopes. And so in this, for this question and for the E group, we had the following grading criteria. Excellent was if they had a meaningful decision rule that included the avalanche problem information. Sufficient was a meaningful decision rule with avalanche, with the danger rating information. Insufficient if they said none of the slopes were appropriate to travel on, which seemed a little bit too conservative for somebody who says they're an E. And problematic was any situation where they basically made errors or had inconsistencies within their choices. So let's have a quick overview of all the results. So for the B's and C's, we focused on the danger rating questions. And what you see here are stacked bar charts, basically, where the whole width represents 100% of the sample. So what you want to see here is more yellows and more oranges and less reds and dark reds. So we see generally fairly good performance on the basic questions. Same with the D's, E's, and F's, where we primarily focused on the avalanche problem question. Somewhat surprising though, if we look at the slope choice questions, we see that the performance in those questions is significantly worse. And that's a very interesting result. Now, of course, the immediate follow-up question is, who are the participants within those groups who perform badly? A better understanding of that will help us to basically create targeted initiatives that might help these people out. What did we find here? We found that avalanche awareness training was a major factor in improving performance within these groups. We found that snowmobilers and snowshoers exhibited lower levels of literacy on some questions.
2-minute warning, 2-minute warning.
Somewhat surprising was that older backcountry recreationalists performed significantly lower than younger recreationalists. And somewhat surprising, years of backcountry experience did not emerge as a factor affecting bulletin literacy. So let's quickly summarize and look at the implications. Avalanche training is a major driver for both self-reported bulletin use routines and the literacy within these groups. However, there's a substantial group of people that don't have the skills they need for the use of the bulletin they say they do. So I think maybe we should think about, are there ways for us to help recreationalists to better self-calibrate their self-perception of their bulletin use abilities? Another interesting result is that we had strong recall and comprehension performance, but challenges with integration and application. And years of backcountry experience didn't seem to have an effect. So I think here we should ask ourselves, are there other ways to provide opportunities for people to advance their decision-making skills? And one of the main feedback we got from our survey was that people really liked these interactive exercises and they would have loved to get some feedback on their performance. And so I think here we have the opportunity to think, can the Avalanche Bulletin play a more active role in avalanche awareness education and provide somewhat of a mentorship role for helping people to better understand where they're at within their decision-making skills and whether they understand the information that's actually presented. If you want to read more about Henry's research, you can download his thesis from our website. We're also hoping to write an article for the journal in the near future, so please stay tuned. I want to thank all the supporters of the research, also Parks Canada and the US Forecasting Centers for promoting the survey. And if there's any time left, I will be happy to take questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Pascal. So everyone, as Brent pointed to earlier, there's a hands up button on your monitor. Get your clicker over to it and get your hand up to ask questions. Brent, I believe our first question is from Bram Willock.
That is correct, Joe. We have Bram Willock from the floor.
Hi, Pascal. Awesome research. This is really cool. Are there plans to put this information, I know it was a source from the public in a huge way. Will the results of this research be presented publicly?
You mean in sort of public avalanche awareness events or so?
Yeah, or to understand, I think a lot of people who would have taken these and passed them around the community would be really interested to know about the results.
Yeah, so we're definitely hoping to present this research in public avalanche awareness events. And as I said, sort of write an article in the journal and the Avalanche Review. Katie, who's going to present right after me, did a similar survey, and there's definitely sort of a lot of interest in these interactive exercises, and so we're definitely brainstorming about possibilities for having those on our website and maybe allow users to see how they perform compared to the survey sample that we've had and so on. So if you have any ideas of how we can make this research, get it out to the public, I would be keen to hear about it.
Sure, I'll send you an email. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Bram. Pascal, it doesn't appear that we have any more questions, but I'm sure some will come up as others, as the other students in your program offer their stuff, which I think has some relation to your presentation. Thanks a lot, Pascal.
Thank you very much.